What's going on, everybody? Hope Tep to the family. Welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective here on the Mighty Motivation Network, where we give our point of view of controversial topics from experience, history, knowledge as African Americans here in America. I'm joined by my co-host, Jerome Battle. How are you, sir?
What's up?
Hey, thank everybody for the feedback they've been giving us on the past few episodes. Even had a few comments where people were starting to interact. That's exactly what we're looking for. And as we're here to spark thought, we're here to spark conversation so things could grow, so things could begin to change. And it starts in the mind and in conversations. So as we go forward to today, I want everybody to start looking at the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin trial. Make sure, especially African Americans, we are paying attention to this trial so we can see not just what happens in the end, but the process of how things happen. So if things don't go into our favor, we can go back and look at the loopholes in the justice system, and that's actually what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about the justice system and some key cases on that shows the divide in African Americans. I think that's what I want to do next week.
Great.
Also, continue to follow the voter suppression bills that are being passed. There's been 47 bills introduced related to voter registration in different states. So make sure that you are beginning to pay attention to those voter suppression bills to try to figure out what you need to do to still register to vote and continue to have your vote accounted for. This episode is sponsored by Jay's Body Works. Does the body of your car need repair, restoration, or paint? For all of your auto body needs, visit Jay's Body Works in Bedford, Virginia, and you can reach him at 434-665-9422. Again, that is Jay's Body Works here in Bedford, Virginia.
Excellent work. He does excellent work.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about the Black Panther Party, the good and the bad,
and the ugly.
So we wanted to discuss this because there are some things about the Black Panthers that were very crucial. And there are some things that we want to avoid moving forward as organizations beginning to be created, and as African American awareness is beginning to grow consciously in the African American community. There are some things in the Black Panther Party that we can use, and there's some things in the Black Panther Party that we never want to use ever again.
Absolutely.
So we're going to get into that. So when discussing the Black Panthers, y'all know me. I've had a few jokes that said we should change the name of the podcast to a chronology of things because y'all know me. I have to talk
give
about
the chronology.
you have to, in order to talk about certain things, you have to know the background. You have to know the backstory of what led to certain things. So when you look at the Black Panther Party, I call it the spirit of Malcolm and a lot of the spirit of Martin.
Oh, absolutely.
So when you look at the Black Panther Party, we have to understand that Malcolm X is assassinated, and then you started to really see African Americans really take on what he was attempting to accomplish with this new organization. So a lot of the leaders were influenced by Dr. King, though, because when we look at the West Coast, LA, Oakland, and specifically, most of these people come from the South as well. This is why we talked about the Great Migration so much, because in order to understand what's going on in the West, it starts in the South, because so many people moved out West. So they understood what Dr. King was saying. They've come from their place. They come from Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana.
That's right.
So when they were in California, they began to see things a
little bit
differently because they still seen the racism, but it was more of a organized racism when you seen police brutality and those things. So they actually seen the things that Dr. King was talking about, but they understood what Malcolm was saying as well. So you seen kind of in the middle of both of those amazing leaders,
Absolutely.
What happened?
Because you had the first great migration was moving from the south to the north.
Right.
And the second great migration was moving from the south to west.
Right.
And as you said, the ones coming from the south were under the leadership and the understanding of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Right.
So the nonviolent approach is what they were used to. And they also were used to a lot of the crimes being committed, the injustices, the inequality being dished out to Black Americans were primarily done by other white citizens, not necessarily law enforcement. Even though it happened, a lot of what these Blacks that were migrating out west saw was on an individual basis, and it was being done by white civilians, not necessarily law enforcement. And as they moved out west, as you said, more organized.
Right.
Now you had police orchestrating the assault, the injustices, the unfairness, the inequality on Black Americans.
Right. And then when you begin to look at, especially in the South, when you look at the South real quick, you're looking at sheriffs and deputies. When you go to Los Angeles, you're looking at the LAPD. You're
police forces.
You're looking at police forces.
Prosecutors.
Right. So you're looking at a totally different type of ideals that begins to happen. And again, they're influenced by also the militant self-defense group created by Robert Williams, which was Negroes with Guns.
That's right.
And you're looking at the Deacons for Defense and Justice in Louisiana, and they actually protected a lot of the civil rights marches. So the concept that they came up with wasn't new, but they took it to a whole different level. So when we look at the chronology of things, you look at number one, Malcolm X is murdered or assassinated in 1965. The Black Panthers are founded in 1966. Dr. King is assassinated in 1968. So we begin to see already in a span of 3 years what begins to arise out of Dr. King and Brother Malcolm.
And let's talk about one particular event that happened in 1965 that sparked some of the concepts of starting the Black Panthers. The Watch Riot.
The Watch Riot.
The Watch Riot, where I think his name was Marquette Fry, pulled over by police for reckless driving. And after allegedly failing a sobriety test, they tried to arrest him. And his moms intervened, and they beat his mom and him in the streets of Oakland at that or Watts at that particular time. And that sparked even to today, one of the worst riots in United States history. Over 34, 35 people were killed that day during the riots. And obviously, a lot of the beginning members of the Black Panthers were aware of these, even were there during some of the riots. So that sparked some of the conversations about how can we as Black Americans defend ourselves against police brutality.
Right. And then right there, you begin to see the shift, because Dr. King actually went to Watts and tried to stop the riots, and they weren't trying to hear that.
Absolutely.
So already you began to see a shift. And when we go back one day, one episode, we'll look at Dr. King's change of philosophies as well. But moving forward with that, you begin to see different organizations starting from there. So you've seen a lot of smaller organizations started in which people were coming together trying to combat whatever was going on, especially in LA. So Huey Newton and Bobby Seale saw that a lot of these organizations weren't sincere.
That's right.
They went to a lot of these organizations in college and began to see that they were either, number one, not sincere, or number two, they were looking just to gain their own popularity.
That's right.
So one of the people that they actually was a student organization that came out of Atlanta, in which Stokely Carmichael was running, in which he actually took over for John Lewis. So in the South, in LA, in Oakland in particular, these student services organizations is what Huey and Bobby was a part of. And one of the things that they was fighting for, as we've seen across the country, what a lot of students were fighting for was African American studies.
That's right.
So
you got to keep in mind that Huey and Bobby were students at a university.
They were students at Oakland Community College, I believe it was called. and they began to fight for African American studies. And Huey comes up with the concept of let's grab some. Well, let me say this. Huey begins to study.
That's right.
Police laws and began to study court laws,
civil law.
He began to study the Constitution and rights and bills and all of these things. And he comes up with the concept that we can carry guns out in the open. So let's go carry guns outside of the campus, in front of the campus, and show the administration that we're serious.
That's right.
To either start this or it's going to be problems.
That's right. Because obviously they felt like civil rights proved incapable of addressing certain conditions.
Right.
Inequality, unfairness, police brutality. Mm-hmm. And it didn't answer one major question. How would Black people in America win not only formal citizenship rights, but actually economic and political power?
Right.
And so they were trying to figure out how can we answer that question, because the civil rights movement did not answer that question.
Right. So they took this idea to the students' organization and they turned it down. So Bobby and Huey and another one of their friends, they sat down and they began to think about how they can still do this. And they came up with the concept of the Black Panther Party for self-defense.
That's right.
And again, we're going to go back and fill in a lot of these holes. I'm just taking you through a chronology of it. And they start the group, and one of the main things that they do, they sit down and they try to figure out, how to organize this group. They come up with a 10-point system. They begin to look at other countries and how they were doing it, because if you look at Cuba, you look at China, they were doing something similar. There was actually 50 countries that gained their independence during that 10-year span.
That's right.
So they began to look at all of those different countries to see how they were doing it. And again, socialism was a big part of the thing. But one of the main things that they wanted to do was patrol the police. Let's protect our community by patrolling the police. Anytime they pull somebody over, we'll get out, maintain a safe distance, have our guns unloaded, and make sure that the person that they're talking to or investigating or giving a ticket to is okay.
That's right.
So
it's important that the way you named the Black Party in the beginning is actual.
Right.
The Black Panther Party of self-defense.
Yes. So again, they're taking on the spirit of Malcolm. We understand Malcolm was all about self-defense. So they're taking that spirit of Malcolm and they're operating within their community. And of course, the Black Panther, the Panther represented, a ferocious animal.
That's right.
That whenever he wouldn't strike out in offense, he would wait until he's backed into a corner and then he would strike.
Right, in defense.
And this idea comes from Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael had his group, and he had the Black Panther on there, and he was the first person that really coined the term Black Power.
Black Power.
So they took that and they kind of incorporated that into their organization. So they patrolled the police, as we said earlier, is because they felt that police was the main perpetrators of violence within their community.
That's right.
So once they start this, recruitment actually doesn't become easy, but the people that they are catering to, who they're trying to recruit, it kind of becomes easy, because they were out, they looked at the groups that they were a part of, and they said the only people that they're not reaching is poor Black people.
That's
the
right.
people they're supposed to be speaking for. So you have all these intellectual people, but ain't nobody going to the hustlers, the drug dealers, the drug addicts, the people that society write off, and asking them what their opinion is and what should be done. So they began to recruit them. And what they did was tell them, look, we got guns, we're going to go patrol the police. And of course, a lot of them thought they was crazy as hell.
Absolutely.
So, but once they showed up and they started doing this, there were crowds of people around watching them. It was like, yo, these brothers got it going on.
That's right.
And because at first when they were doing, the police would get in the car, they wouldn't hand no ticket out, they would just get the heck out of Dodge. So Black people seen it as a sense of power.
Sense of power.
Their community.
That's right. Sense of power that at start was very legal.
Right.
Also.
Illegal.
Exactly. Very legal.
Right. So you could open carry a weapon in the state of California at the time, as long as it wasn't loaded. So
That's right.
they carried their guns, and it couldn't be concealed. And we're going to get into a little bit about that later. But of course, they recruited a lot of people from the streets.
A lot of young people.
Right.
We're talking about people that are between the ages of 17, 20, 21 years old.
Absolutely. And what they began to do, they began to create programs. We're going to get into that programs a little bit later. Another important thing is they start teaching people about their rights. So whenever they would get out on these police patrols, Huey will pull out his, he called it his pocket right book, and he would begin to read the rights to the person that the police was talking to. So he's telling them, look, you have a right to remain silent. You have the right to this. You have the right to ask them if you can leave, if their investigation is over with. You have a right to all
they're
of
not
things.
arresting you. Yeah. Am I free to go?
So you had all of these things that they were doing. So a big key point that happens for the Black Panthers is they provided security for Malcolm X's late wife, for Betty Shabazz. And when they provide security for Huey, goes out of his way to push reporters and people out the way and pull out his gun. And that created more prominence because they seen how serious these people were. And then another one thing that happened was they began to investigate police. So not only patrolling, they began to investigate police. So a murder happened of, I think his name was Denzel Dowell.
Yep.
And so he was murdered, and it came to show that they tried to say that he was murdered in the act of doing a felony. But when they started doing an investigation, they realized that wasn't right. So they actually marched down to the police station and demanded to see the chief of police, because they was like, look, we got our own investigation.
That's right.
And what your police is saying is not right. And that created more Black people started looking at them like, yo,
that's right. Brothers. But as it also put the Black Panthers on the radar of the Black Americans, it also put them on the radar of the government.
Right.
And it put them on the direct radar of the FBI as part of the counterintelligence program.
Yes.
That actually labeled them as a Black nationalist hate group, which later became what you call today as a terrorist group.
Right. And we're going to get into that as well. And again, that Denzel Dowell, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is the first thing that is blasted on their own newspaper. This is important.
That's right.
So they have their own newspaper to give information out to the African American community. The next thing that happens is, after all of this happens, a guy named Donald Mumford, a Republican in Oakland, he calls up to a radio station and said, look, I'm introducing a law, a bill that's going to be passed, to say that they can no longer carry weapons and point it at police.
That's right.
And the Black Panthers decide to go to Sacramento, to the Capitol building, to begin to protest this situation. And of course, they didn't allow Huey to go. Bobby Seale goes, and a few other Panthers go. And of course they go, and while they go, Ronald Reagan is there actually talking to the press.
That's right. Who is the governor of California?
The governor of California. And he's talking to the press, and you see all of these Black Panthers
with guns
to the Capitol building. And they're actually arrested, not because they carry guns on the Capitol building. They were arrested because they didn't unload the ammo before they got back into the car, which was an actual against the law. And right. Huey knew this. If Huey would have been there, Huey was very on point about understanding the law when you carry your weapon. So they actually go to jail after that, because that's the one thing that they forgot to do, was unload the ammo before they get into the car. And then in 1967, that bill actually gets passed. So what they were doing with patrolling the police could no longer be done the way that they were doing it.
Can't carry weapons.
Right.
Can't openly carry weapons.
Right. And it just shows the contradiction, even if we look in 2021,
that's right,
how the Second Amendment is being so championed, but whenever you see Black people carrying it in the same way that a lot of white people do, it's considered terrorism. It's considered a threat instead of your actual right to carry a firearm.
That's right. If you think back to when alcohol prohibition, you often see white Americans carrying loaded weapons,
right,
in public,
right,
even on the doorsteps of courts and municipal buildings, what have you. Mm-hmm. And as soon as Black America started doing the same thing, which was within their legal rights, you had a governor decide, you know what, we can't have it.
Right. Ronald Reagan.
And
if you continue to look at Ronald Reagan, you see what Ronald Reagan.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned something about him last week.
Yes.
That didn't even involve Reaganomics for those that are.
This is before Reaganomics.
Way before Reaganomics.
So again, moving forward, that gave them more national attention. When people saying, "Yo, these brothers carry guns to the Capitol building."
And if you Google pictures of the Black Panthers, that's what you're normally going to see. Them carrying weapons on the doorsteps of federal buildings or courthouses or what have you. You're going to see them. Some of them going to have the fist up, and others going to have the guns. But that's what you're going to see when you see images of the Black Panthers. And
another key thing, and you'll understand why later, is a guy named Eldridge Cleaver. He actually was a New York bestseller for his essays when he was in prison. He put together a book of his essays while he was in prison, and he became an author. And a lot of people, really gravitated towards Eldridge Cleaver's writings. And he decided to join the Black Panther Party, and a lot of people felt like this was going to be the one that's going to get them over the hump into an actual respected organization because of his writing ability, and with their newspaper, his ability to be able to speak. A lot of people thought that, Eldridge Cleaver was going to come in and really take them to the next level. So right after Eldridge Cleaver joins, Bobby Seale is, of course, incarcerated due to the 6-month sentence he gets for the Capitol building.
That's right.
Huey gets locked up on a murder charge, murdering a cop.
That's right.
So, and we'll get into that a lot. And what takes it to a whole nother level is the campaign for Free Huey.
That's
so
right.
They come up with, they begin to rally outside of the prison or the court system, and they begin to chant Free Huey. The song Black is Beautiful, Free Huey, set our warrior free, Free Huey. And that gained national attention, not just for African Americans, white people, Koreans, all the different ethnicities came together and was like, wait a minute, we see the flaw that y'all talking about in the system now. We all know Huey ain't do this. So this puts them on another radar, which is, again, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, which began to create a task force. And in that task force, they talked about not allowing a black messiah. So when you chant Free Huey, it's creating Huey to be this messiah for the African Americans. And that's one thing that J. Edgar was not going to allow. Again, that's why we talked about history. So Malcolm X is assassinated. Dr. King is assassinated. Now they're talking about Free Huey. Now we got a problem because now there's another black messiah coming up that we're going to have to deal with.
That's right.
So looking at that, Martin Luther King is assassinated right after this.
That's right.
And a key thing that happens is Eldridge comes up with the idea to go and ambush police officers. And when they go ambush police officers, 2 officers is wounded, and police comes out and they surround Eldridge and little Bobby Hutton. Little Bobby Hutton,
17 years old,
at 15, and then he was 17 at this time. So Eldridge tells little Bobby, "Look, take off your pants and your shirt.
Get
butt
naked.
With our hands up. That way they can't say that you're reaching for a gun."
That's right.
Well, little Bobby didn't like that idea, and he only take off his shirt, and he goes out, hands up, and he is murdered. And if you actually do your research, there are officers from that precinct that said that, yeah, we murdered him.
Absolutely.
Like they came out and they said that, the autopsy showed that he was shot underneath the armpits, that he had his hands up while being killed. So Eldridge is locked up, and then he gets out on bond, and he skips the bond, and he goes to Algeria in exile. Again, if you don't know why that's important, there's not extradition on anybody in America. If America's not allies with them, they're not obligated to arrest somebody in other countries and send them back to the United States. So he finds a place where they're not allies with the United States, and he stays there in exile. So after that happens, again, Huey is still locked up. Eldridge is running the Black Panthers from across the sea, and chapters began to open up everywhere.
Everywhere.
Chicago,
Detroit,
New
Massachusetts,
York,
Washington,
New
D.C.
Hampshire, Connecticut, all of these places. And we're going to get into a little bit more here in a second. We're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. And we are back. Again, this episode is sponsored by Jay's Body Works. If you're looking to get any auto body work, any restoration, any repair, or any paint, go down to Jay's Body Works here in Bedford, Virginia. That number is 434-665-9422 to get all of your auto body needs. And moving forward through the chronology, for the people who've been seeing the movies come out, the new movie came out, Judas and the Black Messiah, talking about Fred Hampton. And again, I shouldn't have to talk about spoiler alerts because we should know Fred Hampton before the movie comes out. We just should be looking at it to make sure they got it correct.
That's right.
So I'm not worried about spoilers because we need to be doing our research to already know who these people are before they make movies about it. And Fred Hampton, what Fred Hampton does, he creates coalitions in Chicago with the Young Lords and the Young Patriots. So this is something that hasn't been done yet. So when you look at the Nation of Islam, they weren't really colliding with white groups or Latino groups. They were they weren't really in the political field at the time. And then when you look at the civil rights movement, they had people coming into the civil rights, but they weren't really creating coalitions. So whenever you talk about the Young Lords, the Puerto Ricans, and then the Young Patriots, who were just poor white people that came from the South, this was huge, a huge coalition that came because it showed that we're not against white people, we're against oppression.
That's right. And he also made an alliance with major Chicago street rap gangs, which was very important too.
Mm-hmm. So in LA, they made coalitions with the anti-Vietnam white organizations that grew there. So you see they're creating alliances to try to help oppression all over the United States. And then what happens after that, Stokely Carmichael, that I told you that they were pretty much influenced by, he becomes the prime minister for the Nation of ONeill for the Black Panther Party. Right. Now, it was only for 5 or 6 months because there was a miscommunication somewhere with with Huey being locked up and with Eldridge International. But Stokely Carmichael really became a prominent name, especially in the international field as well. So Bobby Seale gets out, and then Bobby Seale was also charged with a murder too. And then also he's on the Chicago 7, which he's at trial. He's actually gagged during the trial because he was speaking out about his rights and his lawyer not being there.
That's right.
So again, we see Huey locked up. We see Bobby Seale get locked up. We see him going to exile. Then Fred Hampton gets murdered in Chicago during the Chicago 7 trial. So, and then after that, you had the New York 21. They're arrested on bogus charges and not let out on bonds. Then Huey gets released. Him and Eldridge began to bump heads and on the party's direction.
That's right.
And then the split occurs really between the East and the West. The East and the West didn't just start with Tupac and Biggie. The East and the West started when Eldridge was taking control of the East, and then Huey was taking more control of the Oakland, LA area of the Black Panther Party. So real quick, we're going to talk about, we're going to go back and fill in those holes, but let's talk about a few key people in the Black Panther Party and why they're significant. Number one would be Bobby Rush. He took over the Illinois chapter after Fred Hampton was murdered by police. And it says Rush worked on several nonviolent projects and built support for the Black Panthers in African American communities, such as coordinating medical clinic, which offered sickle cell anemia testing on unprecedented scale. And if you know anything about politics, Bobby Rush actually ran against Barack Obama in the Illinois Senate.
That's right.
And he beat Barack Obama back in 2000 for the Illinois Senate seat. Elaine Brown, you spoke about her earlier. She became the first woman in the Black Panther Party. She helped found the Free Legal Aid Program and served as the editor for the newspaper. She was elected to the Panther Central Committee. She also recorded music for the Black Panther Party, in which one of her albums was underneath Motown Records. After Seal's departure and Newton's exile, Brown was the chairman of Black Panther in 1974, the only woman to hold the position. In 1977, she managed Lionel Wilson's victorious campaign to become Oakland's first Black mayor, in which she actually ran for president in 2008 underneath
the Green Party.
The Green Party. So again, you see phenomenal things done, and she actually still today is doing more work into the prison reform aspect. You had Angela Davis, and she got really involved into the Black Panther Party, to where she was teaching political education to the Black Panthers. She became known for her involvement with the Soledad prison murder. We'll get into that.
And then, of course, prison reform, as you said.
Prison reform.
Which was huge during that time. Also, let me just back up 1 second. I want you guys to also keep in mind that when you had people like Bob Seeley and Huey Newton and even Fred Hampton and their leadership going back and forth to jail and going to court, they were winning these suits. They were winning these trials. And they had Black attorneys that were obviously very, very smart. And it wasn't Johnny Cochran either. So these attorneys were really very intelligent and knew the law. And if we fast forward a little bit and you get to Assata Shakur, and he'll tell you a little bit about the story behind her. But she went back and forth to court for many years for many different
New Jersey,
and she was winning these. Yeah. They were winning these trials, and then they would refile again
with her aunt as a lawyer.
And with her aunt as a lawyer, and they were winning these trials because they knew the law. At some certain junctures, these people were representing themselves as well. Yes. Attorneys had a difficult time even defending them because they wouldn't shut up. They wanted to talk for themselves. And did a very good job at doing so.
When you look at Huey in particular, Huey started representing himself as a teenager to where he beat like every case that ever came up against him, and one he actually just pleaded out to only serve like 6 months.
That's right.
But Huey created he started representing himself because he wanted to cross-examine witnesses the way he wanted to cross-examine them, get things thrown out the way he wanted to get thrown out. He was very intelligent.
That's right.
And what he was doing. But when you look at, and again, a lot of times when they're in prison, Bobby, Huey, Assata, Fred, they're in solitary confinement.
That's right.
So, because a lot of times the prison ward knew who they was, and they said, listen, we don't want none of that in here.
They want to talk about the inmates.
You ain't going to do nothing but bring all the people together and start revolting even in the prison system. So they put Huey in solitary confinement for months, and they thought they was going to break him in a few days. And he said, "I learned how to train my mind." For months in solitary confinement, to the point where he only met with his lawyer. The only time he came out of solitary confinement was to go to a visit to meet with his lawyer. So he really didn't have much of an idea what was going on outside. Again, Stokely Carmichael coined the term Black Power. He actually came to prominence during MLK's era because he actually tricked MLK to say, "Look, let's do this together." And when he got up there, Stokely Carmichael started talking about something totally different than Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King came back and said, "Listen, I've been used more than once." So he came to power by really taking on the Malcolm thing to the next level as well. Fred Hampton as a 17-year-old was leading the NAACP for youth. So he was at 17 years old, he was already doing amazing things. Until he became a Black Panther. He was one of the most important in the non-aggression pact among Chicago's powerful street gangs, as he said earlier. And of course, creating the coalition with the Young Lords and the Young Patriots called the Rainbow Coalition. Hampton rose to huge prominence until he was murdered by police. Of course, you got Bobby Seale. Bobby Seale eventually runs for mayor. And then you got their programs. And here are a few of the programs that they had. Number one was the main one, which was the free breakfast program.
That's right.
That fed over 20,000 children in 19 different cities. I can't tell you how big that is because teachers will tell you that the most important meal of the day is breakfast. This shows how attentive your child is in class. So they realize this is during the Vietnam War. So soldiers are coming back and they're not having jobs. They're not having access to capital. So their kids are starving. And if you watch the movie Dear Presidents, that'll give you a little bit more insight into what I'm saying.
I can even tell you from experience, we benefited from that program growing up in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. That same program created by the Black Panthers in the Washington, D.C. chapter, as Marion Barry, the mayor of Washington, D.C., incorporated that in public schools. Mm. So for kids that, it wasn't just for families that couldn't afford it. School started so early, a lot of the parents were either already gone to work or had to be to work at the same time the child had to be to school, didn't have time to fix them breakfast. So you would eat breakfast at school. Right. And it was for every kid, not just poor kids. So it was a great program that we actually benefited from.
And a lot of people that started out in the party had to get up at 4:30 and go prepare this breakfast to show that you were disciplined enough to still be in the party. And a lot of times it wasn't gender based. You know, women came up with the idea that, hey, y'all cook breakfast, we'll stand outside and do security with the guns.
That's right.
So you began to see a lot, but the free breakfast program was one. They had the free health clinic, and the clinics were established in 13 different cities. They offer services such as testing for high blood pressure, lead tuberculosis, diabetes, cancer detection screening, physical exams, treatment for colds and flu.
And that's huge too, so everybody will know, in the 50s and 60s and even in the early 70s, a lot of Black people died from tuberculosis.
Yes. So, and again, a lot of women that were helping with that free health clinic, they ended up going into the medical professional field afterwards. So they got a lot of training by being in these programs and able to go on and do greater things. So then you had the Intercommunal Youth Institute, in which they had kids into their own school to be able to raise their consciousness. And they were actually awarded in 1977 by the California governor for being for having set the standard for the highest level of elementary education in the state.
That's right.
So you're talking about major programs. They had the Seniors Against the Fearful Environment SAFE program. And what this did, this offered free transportation for the elderly so they can go cash their social services check without being mugged or robbed. They had free ambulance services. And this is if you were sick or you need to go to the hospital, they had a 24-hour call to where the ambulance will come pick you up, take them to the hospital for free. Then you had the free food program. So along with the free breakfast program, we got the free food program that gives you groceries for the week. So you ain't got to worry about nothing for the poor families.
That's right.
So already you see a bunch of amazing programs
created by 21 and 22-year-olds.
21 and 22-year-olds that just saw a problem in the community and created a solution.
Absolutely.
You had free bus into prison programs for the people that were in prison. Look, we got a bus to take you there to go visit people, and the free legal aid programs we talked about with the lawyers.
That's right.
So the lawyers began to take on a lot of these trumped up charges that came onto the case. And then we're going to the 10-point system. I'll read a few of these and I'll let you comment on them. I'm reading from Huey P. Newton, Revolutionary Suicide. Definitely a book to check out if you're interested in what we're talking about. Also another book is Assata, the autobiography of Assata Shakur. A lot of my information on this podcast is coming from these two books. So with the Black Panther Party, the 10-point system, it came out of what we want and what we believe.
That was the original
concept. Right. So the what we want, number one, we want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black community. And we believe that Black people will not be free until we are able to determine our destiny.
Absolutely. And just to put this in quick perspective, we want power to determine the destiny of our Black community. Mm-hmm. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about segregation.
Right.
And a lot of people think segregation is just when Black people live in one area and white people live in another area and they go to different schools. Right. That's not the only form of segregation. Mm-hmm. Another part of segregation is when you have Black people live in a predetermined area and then they don't control anything in that area.
Right.
They don't own the houses, they don't own the businesses, and they have no say in the political governmental structure. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're talking about. That's what he's talking about in this. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black community.
Clearly perfect. Number two, we want full employment for our people. We believe that the federal government is responsible and obligated to give every man employment or guaranteed income. We believe that if the white American businessman will not give full employment, then that means of production should be taken from the businessman and placed in the community so that the people of the community can organize and employ all of his people and give a higher standard of living.
The one word that you got to think about in that number two is full.
Full.
See, full employment. We're not talking about part-time versus full-time. You're talking about full employment. What they would do is they would get black people to do the work that the whites didn't really want to do.
Right.
The degrading jobs, the jobs that they felt that was worth a black man doing it. So that's what they're talking about in fairness of employment, not full-time or part-time.
Number three, we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our black community. We believe that this racist government has robbed us, and now we are demanding the overdue debt of 40 acres and 2 mules. 40 acres and 2 mules were promised 100 years ago at a restitution of slave labor, mass murder of black people. We will accept the payment in currency, which will be distributed to our many communities.
And this one is huge. If you watch Good Times, they talked about a grocery store that was in their community where the meat was more expensive than in the same store in the white community. So that's robbery. Capitalistic robbery is what they call it. That's what they're talking about there.
Number four, we want decent housing fit for shelter of human beings. We believe that if the white landlords would not give decent housing to our black community, then the housing and the land should be made into cooperatives so that our community with government aid can build and make decent housing for our poor people.
Again, last week we talked about it. Project housing.
Yes.
Cabrini Green, an example. All the funding went to the white housing developments, very little to none to the black.
Right. And if you watch Snowfall, that's something that Franklin and his mother is doing, is they're going around and they're buying up all his property because his mother worked for a white landlord and seeing that he wasn't attempted to fix anything.
That's right.
So they were beginning to buy their own property to say, hey, look, you can live here and we'll give you adequate living conditions.
That's right.
Number five, we want education for our people that exposes the true nature of his descendant American society. We want education that teaches our true history, our role in the present day society.
That's huge because they're telling you in 1967 that having black history is important. True black history is important. Education is important. But just to put it in a little more perspective is when you're in high school, you start in elementary school in some places, you start learning about American history. You start learning about history. And it's 99% white history.
Right.
But even when they're telling you the white side, like when you learned about Ronald Reagan, you learned that he was the president of the United States and he used to be an actor. Right. Nobody knew that he was part of that bill that stopped blacks from carrying weapons openly in public.
Right.
They don't tell you that. They don't teach you that in school.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he's saying. True nature. True nature of history. That's important.
Number six, we want all black men to be exempt from military service. And again, this goes back to what Muhammad Ali was saying. And you talk about it all the time, fight for a country that won't fight for me.
Absolutely. I say that all the time. People used to ask when you was playing basketball, they say, hey, how come you don't stand for the national anthem? And
which is a good point because you were doing that in the 2000s.
Oh, absolutely. And I would cite Muhammad Ali. You expect me to stand up for a country that won't even stand up for me? It's not going to happen.
Yeah, teachers would ask me, why your dad don't stand for the anthem?
Not going to happen. I'm not even taking off my hat for that. I wish they would. Because I would talk.
Number seven, we want an immediate end to police brutality and the murder of black people. Again, that's self-explanatory.
Yeah, absolutely.
We want freedom for all black men held in federal, state, county, and city prisons and jails. Now, with this one, you have to understand what they're saying in this is because they believe that a lot of black people were thrown into prison without due process, without the right, adequate jury of their peers. Because if you look at a lot of these Panthers, a lot of them were on trial. Ashada Shakur, most of her trials, there's only one black person. And a lot of times she got acquitted or it got thrown out because that one black person on the jury said, no, she ain't guilty.
Absolutely.
And a lot of white people came into it thinking that she was already guilty because they had read about it.
Exactly.
So understanding that just because you were a Panther, a lot of white people already had it in their mind that you were guilty or that you should be locked up because they considered you a terrorist from what the media had already portrayed you to be.
That's right.
So with that one, some people say we can't free everybody. They're talking about freeing people that were unjustly put into the prison system because they didn't get a fair trial.
Or was considered political prisoners.
Right. Number 9, we want all black people, when brought to trial, to be tried in a court by a jury of their peer group or people from their black communities as defined by the Constitution of the United States.
We just talked about that.
Yeah.
We talked about that last week.
But we're going to talk about that more. Again, I want to talk about the criminal, the court system, especially while this trial is going on next week.
Good.
And number 10, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. And as our major political objective, a United States supervised to be held throughout the black colony in which black colonial subjects will be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of black people as their national destiny. Again, Revolutionary Suicide, definitely check out this book. But we can see that their 10-point system is articulated greatly.
It's articulated greatly, but also, and we'll get into this in the end, in the summation of this podcast, but what they're saying is very prevalent today.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously, talking off air, one of the things I want to talk about in the last part of this podcast is, how is this relevant to us today?
Right.
How does this relate to you in your life today?
Right.
Because that's important, because some of the things that they were dealing with and trying to come up with a solution for is happening today, right now.
Right. So we talk about a lot of the things that we agree with, things that we like. But we come back from the break, we're going to talk about a lot of problems that occurred. And we are back. Again, follow us on YouTube at the Mighty Motivation Network. So going back into the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense. The main problem that we see is the leadership.
That's right.
So again, when we look at the concept of Bobby, Huey, most of the time they're not on the streets at the same time conducting business for the party.
One's in jail, one's out.
And whenever they're incarcerated, they're actually in solitary confinement to a point where they can't have any interaction of what's going on into the world. So one of the problems is you had, as it grew massively, that's one of the problems, it grew overnight to the point where they weren't checking people on who were, you want to be in, all right, we're all black, go to the free breakfast program, cook, whatever, do it, let's do it. And it grew so much that you had so many leaders that had their own agenda.
Own agendas and own demons.
Yeah, own agendas, own demons. You're talking about a group of people. You're not talking about, the Dr. Kings that, went to school and came up in a church. You're not talking about the religious people that follow a certain system. You're talking about people who were
educated kids with a bunch of thugs following them.
Yeah, you're talking about a lot of different things, all under 25 and under. So when you begin to look at that aspect, you see that communication was a huge part that came with the Black Panther Party. And all three leaders were divided, whether you look at Bobby, Huey, and Eldridge for whatever reason. But when you look at the trial of Huey, one of the problems that came was Eldridge came out and said in the newspaper during Huey's trial of the murder of a police officer is that it's open season kind of on police officers.
That's right.
And Huey felt it was disrespectful because it made it look like he was guilty.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the problems that occurred. And
it made him look like he was guilty, but as you find out later on in studying about Huey, he was guilty of a lot of things. He was guilty of a lot of violence and murders. Mm-hmm. Some he got acquitted for, even though there's evidence to support that he did commit those murders. And then there were some murders that took place of not just white people and not just police officers, but killing of other Black Panthers.
Yeah.
I mean, this Huey was the epitome of violence, and it really didn't matter who it was against.
Right.
I think the last person he was accused of killing was a white prostitute and or just a I don't even know if she was white, but she was a prostitute. And the person who was going to rat him out ended up attempting to kill him and buried him alive, and the guy survived, paralyzed from the waist down.
Right.
I mean, demons that came with this leadership. Now, we can talk all day about them still being young. They were young, but obviously they were doing some things that they knew was wrong, and it was difficult for them to be a leader doing those type of things.
Right. And another problem that happens is Huey and Bobby think that Eldridge is getting involved with issues that has nothing to do with what they're trying to do. He called it irrelevant.
Things in other countries. He
Yes.
was more involved in international issues than he was about things, struggles and frustrations and inequalities and injustice towards blacks.
Right.
Here in
And
America.
again, you have to understand, Eldridge is not in America no more. So, gauging war with police officers, Eldridge ain't even got to be in the middle.
That's right.
So, you can see the frustration from some of the Panther leaders who were looking at this person making decisions from so far away. Huey also disagreed that allowing white radicals to speak for the party. Again, this goes back to Malcolm. Like, you can help us, you can support us, but you can't lead us.
That's right.
And, you know, Eldridge was allowing people to speak on behalf of the party who had no idea about, again, the point system that we were talking about when it came to the party. After Huey was released from prison, he wanted to really go back into the programs. Let's focus on the free breakfast program. Let's focus on the health clinic. Let's focus on what we call intercommunalism.
That's right.
So let's focus on that. When Eldridge was more like, nah, let's overthrow the government. Let's rebel. Let's do a war. Let's do whatever.
Huey started thinking in terms of politics.
Yes.
At that point. And how can we make real change? Okay. Killing police officers, standing off with cops, that's not going to do it.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not going to do it. We've gotten enough attention. We've gotten enough followers that now we've built up this backing, this support group that we can make real change. But we got to do that in legislation.
Right.
So now we need more blacks in politics, and that's what he was leading towards before he was assassinated.
Right.
And then you have Fred Hampton, who obviously had that same mindset in saying, hey, let's go this route. Let's get more blacks on city council. Let's get more blacks being mayors of major cities. Let's have blacks being in Congress. And they did that. Not just black males, but also black females, as we talked earlier about Brown. Elaine Brown.
Right. And this is something that Bobby really pushed. Bobby from the jump was a political advocate.
That's right.
From the jump. And then when Huey gets out of prison, the free Huey really created him as a symbolic figure of the Black Panther Party, to where he was kind of put above everybody else.
That's right.
And if you look at how the Black Panther Party was started and what its ideals were, it was power to the people. So the people make the party great, not one person being above the people.
That's right.
So that's why Huey from the jump didn't even want anything to really do with being the chairman or certain leadership. He just said, listen, we need people who are going to be able to be powerful.
That's right.
I don't care about being a leader. Even when he was in prison, he was like, listen, don't raise money to get me out. Take the money that you're raising and give it back to the people.
That's
so we see some good ideals from Huey when it came to that, but it grew frustrating when he got out, because whenever he would begin speaking to people, they were listening to him and admiring him, but not listening to him to figure out what he was saying about the political awareness. And then the party that was created in Oakland, it changed when you go from state to state, because laws change. So there's certain things that you can do in California that they couldn't do in Chicago.
That's right.
And if you don't create those boundaries or create those avenues to be able to do one thing to the next, one person or a whole group of committee, so to speak, to come up with an understanding, there is not going to be any type of structure.
That's right.
So leadership. So everybody in every city is going to be doing their own separate thing.
That's right.
Based on what they think the party wants to do. And Assata Shakur actually said, no movement can survive unless it is constantly growing and changing with the times. So again, we see the party kind of was at a standstill, because the number one thing you were doing was patrolling the police. And well, now they passed this bill to where you can't do that anymore.
That's right.
So now what adjustments need to be made in order to grow? And if you don't make these adjustments, your organization is not going to be complete, because the people are going to be thinking one thing and the leadership is going to be thinking another.
That's right. It's not going to progress.
Right. And Assad Shakur also said revolution is not an action, it's a process that changes with time.
Absolutely.
And
See, people think revolution is just a war.
Yeah.
It's not.
So when we look at the problems, a lot of the problems came from the leadership problems, particularly with Huey and Eldridge Cleaver bumping heads. One thing that ends up happening was the New York 21, they get arrested and charged, and they actually ended up set free. But Huey thought it was a bad look from the get-go. So what he did was, well, it's a few smaller stories that happened in between. But at the end of the day, Huey ends up expelling them from the party. And Eldridge and Huey decide to go on a talk show to discuss a rally that's about to happen. And when they get on the talk show, Eldridge doesn't discuss the rally. He talks about how the New York 21 is mad at Huey's leadership.
That's right.
And Huey gets mad about
Disrespect.
And Huey gets mad about it and expel a few other people, and then you have a party split.
That's right.
So the split happens, and everything goes down here from there.
Also, while this is going on, just keep in mind, while this is going on, there's other Black groups being created at the same time that this is going on.
Yeah.
And one of them is called the Black Guerrillas.
Yeah, because like we said, if you're not progressing with the time, other people are going to see that, and they're going to take what you have, they're going to apply different things to it, and they're going to start their own.
Absolutely. And what happened with Huey is, after he was released, a member of this new group called the Black Guerrillas felt that a good way to have the Black Guerrillas become more prominent, more well-known, is he thought that he would kill Huey.
Yeah.
And
there were threats made on Huey. Now, Asada seems to think, after reading her book, that the FBI wrote these letters. I don't know. But one thing that ends up happening is Huey gets like security detail, and he's actually living in a like $600 suite. And the people looked at it, was like, this leader is living in a $625 a month suite, and people are out here starving.
Right.
That goes against the whole ideals of why the party is started.
So dissension, we talked about this before. When you don't have unity, you become vulnerable.
Right.
And the party started losing that unity and leadership, and they became vulnerable.
Right. And again, when becoming vulnerable, you had people like, if you watch the Black Messiah, Judas and the Black Messiah, you see people like William ONeill infiltrate as an FBI agent.
Speaking of that, how did you feel about him, the actor that played that part, being nominated for
an award for being great at being a Judas?
Yeah, for being great at being a Judas, but being a Judas and bringing down a Black leader.
Well, number one, he did a phenomenal job. Charlemagne don't like him, and Charlemagne actually said he did too well of a job.
He did,
but he definitely deserves an award as an actor. Now, whether that's symbolic of the world we live in, it is.
It almost feels like they gave him an award because you played the role of somebody who did something great.
Yeah, and William ONeill. There was a guy by the name of Cotton. He comes from California and goes to lead over in the New York branch. Come to find out, he was an FBI agent. There were so many other people. Like, again, there was no screening process. There is no screening process to begin in the organization. If you do what you do, you go up through the ranks.
And if
the smarter you are, you're going to go up through the ranks. So you had people going up through the ranks and becoming, because William ONeill was actually head of security for Fred Hampton, because he had access to a vehicle, he had access to guns, he had access to things to the FBI that the Black Panthers never really looked at it. But when we see this, we've seen a lot of people infiltrate through the FBI.
Yeah, and later on you find out that ONeill said that he really had no he had no ties or commitment to the Black Panthers.
Right.
And that obviously what happened is he got arrested, I think, for stealing the car.
Stealing the car.
And as part of his agreement to let that charge go away, he agreed to infiltrate the Black Panthers.
Right.
Later on, for those that don't know, he ended up committing suicide.
He committed suicide. A lot of people think that Fred Hampton wasn't murdered by the shootings of police. William ONeill actually drugged him earlier that night, and they believe that the drug overdose he wasn't going to wake up from that anyway.
Yeah, well, it wasn't his wife, but it was the woman that was pregnant by him that was there, because obviously while he was out on the drug, they got her out because she was pregnant. But she testified later, or gave an interview later, that when she tried to wake him up, he did speak.
Right.
He did lift his head and speak, so he was alive. And then when doing the raid, they shot him. They didn't kill him initially. They just shot him. And then they asked, is he dead? And the officer shot him 2 times in the head and said, the N-word's dead now.
Right.
And they drug him out.
Right.
But obviously, that was the whole goal, was to kill him. So in my opinion, it doesn't matter whether ONeill killed him or the cops killed him. It was all orchestrated by the cops.
And this is why we definitely will look at the court system later, because they didn't win criminal charges. They won civil charges. Again, this happens a lot in the Black community where criminal charges are not win, and the civil charges do win, and you get money instead of actual due process of justice.
That's right. I'm gonna speak a little bit about that in the last part of this when we get to the summation.
So again, you get the one person is above the other people. Of course, Huey becomes symbolic. Another problem that I just seen as I looked at it, nobody said this, but I looked at it from this perspective, was you had intellectuals and you had what we consider soldiers.
That's right.
And I believe that the party didn't specify. They kind of expected you to be both. So you had these soldiers who were really good at enforcing things. You wanted them to be able to be intellectual. Right. So to present to people what it is that they were doing, and they couldn't do so. And you wanted these intellectuals to die for something, suicide cases they will call
That's right.
And it wasn't going to happen. You had these 2 barriers that you expected people to do, and it just wasn't going to happen because it was so out of their character.
You had your leaders going into these shootouts. You had these leaders on the steps of courthouses with guns, instead of having your soldiers doing that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like having a production-minded employee in an administrative position.
Right.
It's not going to work.
Right. So if you arrest an intellectual for a murder, of course he's going to work with the FBI.
That's right.
He's an intellectual. He's not a soldier. And if you arrest a soldier, of course he's not going to be able to articulate himself in court.
That's right.
They didn't understand that barrier because Assata Shakur did say there was no political education to educate people on what they need to do. Most people came into the Black Panther Party because, number one, I get to get a gun.
That's right.
Number 2,
and I get to stand off against police.
Yeah, I get to wear all black. I get to look the part. I get to wear the afro. I look like somebody. It became a symbol more than actual reading what their objective was.
That's right. And again, a lot of it we can attribute to one, them being young,
mm-hmm.
2, what they were exposed to at that point, because you got to remember this time they're between 17, 21, 22 years old in 1967. So they've seen a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Through growing up in the 50s.
Right.
So they've endured a lot. They've seen a lot. They've heard a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what molded them to the individuals they were at that age. So they were doing what they thought at the time made sense.
Right.
But as they got older and they got to the end before they were murdered, especially Fred Hampton, which is why I think I now understand why they probably made the movie about him. Because I think at the beginning I told you, I don't know why they made it about him. Why didn't they make it about Huey? But now I know it's because he started moving away from all of that and moving more into the political side as he got older and got a better understanding of how to make real progress.
And that's actually goes back to, a thing that we like to say, that you become more prominent after you're killed.
That's right.
When you look at Fred Hampton, he didn't have a chance to continue on for 10 to 15 more years to see what mistakes he could have possibly made.
Right.
So we have to glorify him in a way. And if you look at Huey, we look at the next 10, 15 years of his life, we understand why Huey is not selected, because it's hard to to glorify somebody and follow somebody that years later they didn't live by that.
Exactly.
So that's another reason why we'll talk about Dr. King on another time. When you look at Tupac and Biggie, you know what I'm saying? You can glorify them as the greatest rappers, but what happens if they was to stay in the game 10, 15 more years? Could they sustain that? Again, that's off topic, but that's a little bit in comparison that when you die, you kind of get or you get murdered or killed. Not saying it's a good thing, but as legacy-wise, it's able to carry on better because we got a smaller microscope at what to look at.
That's right.
But if you watch that movie, one of the things that ended up happening when Fred Hampton is killed, there's like 7 or 8 Panthers living in one place. This happens because J. Edgar Hoover was harassing families, and people was like, instead of going home, they ain't got to know where we live at. We're going to step away from our family, abandon our family.
That's right.
Stick to the cause and live together. There was actually songs that came out that said we got to live together in order to grow and unite with the Black Panthers. So the organization becomes very vulnerable. And the same thing that made the party great is the same thing that made the party bad.
That's right.
They were young, which was a good thing, but they were young, which was a bad thing.
That's right.
They were enthusiastic about change, which was a good thing, but being too enthusiastic means you're not using logic and sense, which becomes a bad thing.
That's right.
You don't continue to
too young to have a real strategy.
Yeah.
And able to in order to be able to overcome some of the things that they were dealing with, the conditions.
Too young and too quick.
Absolutely.
When you look at Elijah Muhammad with the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad was doing things for years before people actually start catching on to it. You're talking about almost an over a year sensation for the Black Panthers.
Absolutely. I think we talked about this before. I had the unfortunate opportunity to speak to somebody who had committed a double homicide.
Mm-hmm.
And when I asked him, I said, what made you do it? And he said, I had access to the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have that time to think about it. He had access to the gun. And it happened. You would think that with these young kids, 17 to 21, 22 years old, that if they had more time, that they probably would have moved away a lot sooner from the violence part and got more into the political realm of creating change.
Right. And I think that was the biggest thing is a lot of people didn't join the party for the actual political part. They joined the party so they can sell guns.
That's right.
And Huey actually said that probably was the baddest thing that they did was just give anybody guns.
Well, you also got to keep in mind that one of the things, how did they raise the money to get these guns?
Right.
So, of course, a lot of the things that they were going to trial for and killing police officers because they robbed banks or whatever. I think one point they robbed a drug dealer, who knows? But because we don't know how much of that was true. That's the story that's being told. But obviously, one of the things that they did is they went and bought copies of this book called The Little Red Book.
Yeah.
And The Little Red Book was basically an outline for warfare done by, what's the guy's name? He was a Chinese military guy, something to Song. But they got this book, and without even reading it first, they started selling this book on campus, and people were buying it.
Yeah.
And then they decided to read it, and it became the structure for how they wanted to run the organization, to be militant against the cops.
Right. And again, they looked at other countries to see how they did it, and they applied that to America to the point where the biggest downfall for the Black Panther Party came because they were the number one threat to America. Not the Vietnamese,
that's right,
the Vietnam War, not the KKK,
not Germany,
not the Italian mob,
not
Black Panther Party. Number one on the America threat list. So again, that made Reagan give more power to J. Edgar Hoover, who began to infiltrate the Black Panthers more. So again, we talked about it earlier how a lot of these trials they beat. A lot of it wasn't just to try to get them convicted. It was to arrest them, to separate them from the party. Again, divide and conquer is the number one thing. So again, that's why we talked about Huey, Bobby, Eldridge. All of these people are not on the same page because they're not around each other.
That's right. And this, so you look at this in comparison to Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers. When you have Martin Luther King, civil rights movement, you assassinate him. What happened after that?
Right.
So you had Medgar Evers. He petitioned the Justice Department about segregating schools. He's assassinated. What happens after that? So you stop the progression when you take out the heads.
Yeah.
You take out the leadership, it stops the progressing. So that's what they wanted to do with the Black Panthers. So instead of assassinating them initially, because the same thing happened with Martin Luther King, you try to do it by imprisoning them first. Let's see if we can put him in jail. Right. And we get him in jail, we put him in solitary so he doesn't have access to anybody, can't communicate. We can slow down the progression by doing that. And that's what they were trying to do.
We'll be right back as we look at a few positives, and we'll come up with our conclusion. And we are back. Again, this episode is sponsored by Jay's Body Works. Does the body of your car need repair, restoration, or paint? For all of your auto body needs, visit Jay's Body Works in Bedford, Virginia. That number is 434-665-9422. And continue on. There are a few positives that we get from the effect of the Black Panther Party that I want to point out. Number one is, for me, when I looked at it, it's not tied to religion, which means there's less division in our objective. Because again, when you look at the Black Panther Party, Nation of Islam had already started to do something similar to this, but there was not a political stance until Louis Farrakhan began to become more political afterwards. But theirs was more a religious stance.
At least that's what people assume because of what they stood for.
Right. When you look at the civil rights, you know what I'm saying? They were mostly the Southern Christians with the nonviolent. So by not being tied to religion, anybody can join.
That's right.
You know, they got letters from 15-year-old girls said, you know, how can I join? What religion do I have to be? And when that's not tied to religion, more people want to come in. And that may have been a problem too. I don't know. That may be a good thing and it may be a bad thing because you don't live by a set of principles.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. And as we discussed, and we didn't go into all the graphic details about them, but some of the demons was based on the fact of they had a lack of principles, or different principles.
Right. And I know for Huey, just reading Huey, he actually wanted to orchestrate it like a church, but not like a church. The one thing that he liked about his church, his father was a pastor.
That's right.
One thing he liked about the church was the community coming together and involving themselves in each other's lives.
And engagement and dedication.
That's right. That's what he wanted to incorporate by the community coming together and involving each other in each other's lives and problems and creating solutions for everybody. That's for the good. Another thing is the initial bylaws was drug use is not permitted.
That's right.
But of course, whenever they created coalitions with we considered the hippies, of course, you know, drugs became a problem and it ended up becoming Huey's demise actually.
Well, again, even without the Rainbow Coalition, we talked about this last week, if you put blacks in an area and you have poverty, and you have overpopulation, and you have no economic or financial development, the one thing that will come to your aid is drugs and gangs. Or two things that will come to your aid is drugs and gangs, and the third will be anything criminal.
Absolutely. Another thing that I like is they raise money to bond people out of jail. So the community can come together and raise money to get a person out of jail. What else can we come together and raise our money together to do for?
That's right.
Like you said, how is this important to me today? You can see a whole community together to bond somebody out, bail them out of jail, out of prison. We can come together, put our money together to do what in the community for the better of our community.
That's right.
When you look at the programs that they created, we can do all this by putting our money together and creating what we maybe call our own socialism.
That's right.
In our own community, of everybody being equal and sharing out of everything. They created international alliances, China, Cuba, Korea. It was a message for the dying love for the people. For the people. That is the important thing about the Black Panthers. That's what their initial message was. We want to be for the people, by the people.
That's right. And you got to keep in perspective too when you say, you used to hear them say power to the people.
Right.
Power, black power, power to the people, power to the black people. It was not just the power of saying we could stand up to police brutality. It was saying that you are empowered as a Black American, as a Black person. You are empowered. You are empowered by, one, knowing your history, and two, learning how to conduct yourself in any type of situation.
Right.
And that empowerment is something that they wanted Black people to have. And they were trying to get that to you by making you aware. Making you aware.
So that's what we know. We know it ain't just Black power. We know that Black knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
That's why we continue to talk about in this podcast how knowing your history and educating yourself is the most important thing to creating power structure.
That's right.
And being able to influence change. Another thing that I like is they use the courtroom for a political statement.
That's right.
They a lot of the people in the media say they used us. They used us.
That's right. That's right.
Instead of talking about certain things, they used it to push their political agenda. And we see that through the growing movement of it. We just talked about it. They gave Black people confidence, empowerment, freedom. For themselves.
Gave them pride. Made them feel proud of being Black.
Yeah, Black is beautiful. It made people not want to, put a perm in their hair to straighten their hair out. It made them not put makeup on and say, yo, I'm Black and I was born like this and I'm beautiful like this.
That's right.
And we still see it today with people going natural because they
and they're still having to justify.
Yeah.
That's the sad thing is that when people go natural, they have to justify why they're going natural. Even celebrities have to justify why they're not wearing makeup, why they have an afro now, and they're having to justify it even today.
Right. We are beautiful just like we are. And the Black Panthers may not have created that because people started wearing dye sheets and started wearing natural before the Black Panthers became relevant.
That's right.
But they took it to a whole different level.
That's right.
When we begin to look at, they help Black people know what their rights is. So they did show that, and they studied that there were a lot of African Americans that knew what their rights were. And if they didn't know, somebody close to them knew, would tell them what your rights are. So
Absolutely.
We did see a raise in consciousness. And we talked about that a little bit last week about knowing what the laws are and knowing what your rights are. It gave people a sense of responsibility to their community.
That's right.
By doing these programs, people had to be involved into the programs. The people was the only ones that was going to be able to run these programs. So when I look at the positives, that's some things that we could take away. There's some myths that I want to debunk real quick before I let you do your thing. Number one, the myth is, terrorism, that the Black Panther Party was a terrorist group. I don't believe that their ideology should be considered terrorism. When we look at terrorism is somebody taking a machine gun into a movie theater and shooting it up, and then you give him a bottle of water when he come out. And if he was Black, he would be arrested. He would be killed on the site. That is terrorism. That they weren't peaceful. Again, their original name was the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense. They didn't decide to do harm to anybody until they decided that peace wasn't going to happen in that area. And another myth was that a lot of people I heard compared them to the KKK where they didn't like white people. Again, this is why we talked about the coalitions.
That's right.
They did a lot of work with different white groups. They hated oppression.
That's
so right. that debunks a few myths. And I'll let you talk.
Yeah, I just felt compelled to do this. I don't really pay attention to views, podcast views. I usually pay attention to viewer comments and feedback, viewer thoughts, perspective, which is why I always ask you what kind of feedback did you get, but not necessarily the number of views. Not until recently, I started looking at the numbers. Somebody can post something right now about a video game, music, a celebrity, or just a quote like, the only person that deserves a special place in your life is someone that never made you feel like you were an option in theirs.
Right.
And people will go crazy and view it and post it and repost it and share it and all kinds of things. And the numbers of views will be high. The number of comments will be high too. So I looked at the number of views for My Unapologetic Perspective, and it's gotten over 5 episodes along public comments, not a whole lot. Now, we got a lot of private comments. We've got a lot of private comments. And the question to me is why? And it begs the question, why? Why are the views for the podcast or the discussion not even comparable to other posts? And it's disproportionate. And I ask myself why. Maybe they don't like us, but it's not about us. So I don't think that's it, because it's not about us. So you can exclude that. So I started thinking, maybe it's because people don't know. And I actually had somebody tell me this. How does this relate to me today? Right now, how does any of this apply to me right now? So for the Black viewer, if you think injustice, inequality, and unfair treatment, prejudice practices do not relate to you, tell us what you do in your everyday life that you don't have to deal with those struggles, so we can disseminate that information to the masses, so we can all live like you. Because we don't.
Because I would love to.
I would love to. Now, for those of us that continue to face these struggles and these conditions and bear witness to others facing the same conditions and treatment, here's why we think talking about what happened prior and what happened in the past relates to you today. Let's give you some examples. In 1940, police routinely used violent force against blacks as a means of preserving segregation. Okay? You stay in your area, and we'll do what we need to have you stay there. Go home, back to your community. Things like that is what you often heard. And at some point, blacks said, you know what, we can't stand for that. Because, one, it's not right. So remember how law enforcement treated Black Lives Matter protesters, and let's say 2012, 2013. Trayvon Martin was murdered. And again, when George Zimmerman was acquitted. That doesn't relate to you. For those that don't know how the past applies to you today, that didn't relate to you at all. What about 2014 Ferguson, in Ferguson, Missouri, when Officer Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown? While he had his hands up, law enforcement used force against the protesters when they were protesting the fact that he was murdered. And then he wasn't even in charge. He wasn't even charged. That doesn't bother you? For those that want to know how this relates to you today, that doesn't bother you. I would find it hard to believe that doesn't bother you. 2014, Eric Garner, for those that may not remember, and I'll be honest with you, I can't tell you I remember all the names. I don't. Was killed when an officer administered a prohibited chokehold. Can you not relate to that? Although it was clearly shown on the video footage, the grand jury did not even indict the officer. George Floyd, trial going on right now. All circumstances surrounding his murder. You see it. You see it on the video. You see it going on in the trial right now today. That doesn't bother you? 2019, Elijah McCain was killed in Colorado by the police, being sedated by paramedics. Even after investigators proved the police and the paramedics acted inappropriately. Even after they said that even posed for photographs afterwards, nobody's charged. Nobody's charged. That doesn't boil your skin. That doesn't get your blood boiling to the point that you feel obligated to do something. At least listen to what's going on. Have a discussion. So, and the list goes on. Breonna Taylor, 2020, was murdered while asleep in her apartment by police rendering a no-knock warrant. That doesn't upset you. The only officer found guilty was found guilty because his stray bullet went into an apartment of someone else. He's the only officer that was found guilty. That doesn't bother you? 2014, Tamir Rice, 12 years old, killed in Cleveland, Ohio by an officer because he had a toy gun. The officer claims that when he arrived, he told Rice numerous times to drop his weapon, and he did not. He shot him. However, when you go back and watch the video footage and listen to the audio, he never says a word. He pulls up and immediately opened fire on a 12-year-old who had a gun, a toy gun that has an orange part in the middle of the barrel. Clearly a toy. Killed. Guess what? No charges. That doesn't piss you off? Excuse my language. That doesn't piss you off? Andre Hill. I'm just going to name a few. Andre Hill. Stephen Clark. Oscar Grant. Sandra Bland. Philando Castile. Tony McDaniel. Ahmaud Arbery. Rashard Brooks. Antoine Rose. Sean Bell. That's just naming a few. You want to look at history? Fred Hampton was murdered in his own apartment in his bed, just like Breonna Taylor. So you want to know how history plays a part? I'm not even talking about history seems to come back around. I'm just telling you, never stop. It's still happening. So Fred Hampton, 21, murdered. Bobby Hutton, 17, murdered. Surrendering with his hands up. Mark Clark, 22, which was the guy that was sitting in the chair when Fred Hampton was murdered. Bunchy Carters. John Huggins, I think you mentioned him. Emmett Till, for those that remember, we're not talking about Black Panthers, but he was murdered.
Emmett Till, somebody Trayvon Martin.
Exactly. I will give you one more. George Steiny Jr. Killed in an electric chair in 1944 at the age of 14. He was accused of and convicted of killing 2 white girls. After his arrest, his parents had no contact with him. His father lost his job, and the house they were living in belonged to the company that he worked for. So he lost their home. This kid, 14 years old, was executed 81 days after he was arrested. Right. 81 days, 14 years old. Just recently, they found out that he did not commit the crime. They went back and researched, did the investigation, did the forensics, and found out he did not kill these 2 girls. Yes. That doesn't bother you? Right. So for the people that say the things that you guys are talking about, it's great, but how does it apply to me? If this doesn't tell you how it applies to you, then there's nothing I can tell you. Yeah. All I can tell you is continue to watch people that post things about music. Continue to watch the dance videos on, Memphis something, Memphis Jukin, where they got the guys dancing. Continue to watch that. Continue to do your posts on giving people advice on their marital and relationship issues. Continue to do that. Right. For the people that understand that this is something that's been going on and has not changed and will not change until you decide to make a difference, then I want you to continue to watch and comment. Let us know your thoughts. Please, I'm asking you, let us know your thoughts.
And I'll go off there real quick. Everybody knows me. I'm a motivational speaker here in Bedford, Virginia. Motivational speaker, mentor. I work with Black kids. I work with white kids. Mostly I have a great relationship with white people. Most of my support comes from white people. And starting this podcast was boiling inside of me, but I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I didn't want anybody to feel uncomfortable. But just what you said, who am I to talk about feeling uncomfortable for people who've been comfortable forever?
Exactly.
The one person that should feel uncomfortable is me, which we have ever since we've arrived in this country.
That's right.
So these conversations, it's not to create racism. Racism is already there. We're talking about it. These conversations have to be had, and I hope white people listen to it and be able to have these conversations amongst themselves to understand what we're talking about. And this is just not black people knowing their history. White people have to know real history themselves. That's right. Because everything that we've talked about, this is why I bring up the chronology of things. Because a lot of white people have no idea how black people have been put into these certain positions to be in oppression.
That's right.
So until we have these conversations, honest research, researching the researcher, going back and looking at the people who created certain things to look at their background, when people laugh at cancel culture, no. The cancel culture, people are realizing that no, we should not be listening to these things. That's we should not be talking about these things. We don't want our kids to be exposed to these things because it's not right.
Absolutely.
These conversations have to be had because a lot of people are not having them. And as a motivational speaker, I give motivational messages. I post positive things on Facebook. A lot of people like it. They love it. They tell me how motivational I am. Right. But what does motivation get us if we cannot have a real conversation?
That's right.
What does motivation give us if the black kid and the white kid and their parents are still not knowledgeable about what's going on in the world? Because we can't move forward until we deal with the past. And a lot of times when it comes to America, America is built on blood. And one thing America continues to do, it continues to build on top of a bad foundation.
That's right.
Without going back and looking at what's underneath the foundation. Because a lot of times when you go back and look at what underneath the foundation, you will find African Americans that's been whipped, killed, oppressed, thrown in prison, thrown in segregation for the benefit of white America.
That's right.
So we have to begin to have these conversations. And black people, you should be the most people that be going back and looking at history to stop accepting whatever people tell you.
That's right.
So when I talk about Judas and the Black Messiah, the reason why I said it shouldn't be a spoiler alert is because you should already know.
Should already know.
I shouldn't have to tell you this. Now, I understand there's new education to be learned, but after watching that movie, how many people actually went back and researched it?
Or how many people just thought it was entertaining?
Right. How many people knew that it was true?
Exactly.
Because when I looked at that movie, I said, this is 95% true.
That's right.
But you have to go back and you do your research. You have to go back and you have to look at things as it correlates. And the more you dig into the past, the more you, again, like he said, you will see the present. And the more we understand that we need to address this now before it continues in the future. Because I have a daughter that is mixed. So one thing I have to tell my daughter, she doesn't like when I talk about some of these things, but I said, listen, you're mixed. Most people think that you're black. So you will be treated like a black person.
Absolutely.
So you have to understand both sides of where you come from. Because there are a lot of people out there who do not understand why we're having these conversations. It's not to create more division. Because the more we ignore it, the more division happens.
Absolutely.
So we're addressing these things because people need to be consciously aware. And again, this podcast is not to be 100% correct. I can handle somebody disagreeing with me. I can handle somebody giving me their point of view because I don't know everything from every angle. Right. So until you have these conversations, black people, going back and looking at your history, till you have these conversations, black people, going back and research the people who gave you the information, and you see things from a different point of view, you will understand. And I'll end it with this. This is the reason why I wanted to do the Black Panthers. Because a lot of people see the Black Panthers as being a hate group. But what the Black Panthers did was made white people put the shoe on the other foot.
That's right.
So they seen it as police officers being harassed. They seen it as white America being oppressed by black people. And it just shows you, says, now you know what we feel like.
That's right.
That's all. That's when you look at the totality of it. When you look at some of the murders that happened, some of the police killings, you look at some of the things, they call it retribution.
That's right.
They call it eye for an eye.
That's right.
So the reason why you hate it so much when we bring up the Black Panthers is because now you know what it feels like to be black every day in America.
That's right. Now you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, now you're uncomfortable. So that is why we're having these conversations. I didn't do this episode to glorify the Black Panthers. Again, we went through a lot of the negatives. But I wanted you to see what their mindset was. Because you have to understand why they were doing what they were doing. This is not similar to the KKK. The KKK was just to hate black people. This group was going to protect black people.
That's right.
Now, where it went from there, we went through there.
That's right.
But when you look at history, you look at the mind of a black person, the same thing we're doing now. We just want you to be aware of what's going on. Thank everybody for tuning in. We love everybody out there, but we gotta have these conversations. Please comment on what you think, what your perspective is. Listen, we with it. We can talk about it. We're not here to bash anybody, but the conversation's gotta be had.
Absolutely.
Love y'all.